In October 2025, satellite cameras orbiting for 100 miles above the Earth picked up something no algorithm should ever have to detect. Pools of blood, visible from space. In the city of El Fasher, Sudan, tens of thousands of civilians had just been massacred. The UN documented over 6,000 killings in the first 3 days alone. Witnesses described bodies filling the streets, fighters executing patients inside hospital wards, 500 people gunned down at once in a university dormitory. The UN called it genocide, and the world barely noticed. While your feeds were full of other news, Sudan has been living through the worst humanitarian crisis on the planet, worse than Gaza. Worse than Ukraine, more than 150,000 people dead, nearly 13 million displaced, 25 million facing. Famine, this is the story they haven't told you. To understand how Sudan got here, you need to go back, not decades, but just a few years. Sudan has been one of the most unstable countries in the world for most of its modern history. Decades of authoritarian rule under Omar al-Bashir, a genocide in Darfur in the early 2000s that killed hundreds of thousands. And in 2019, a popular uprising that finally toppled al-Bashir after 30 years in power. For a brief moment, there was hope. A fragile transitional government was set up. The military and civilian leaders were supposed to share power on the road to democracy. That hope didn't last long. Today, Sudan is being torn apart by two men and the armies they command. On one side, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, the head of the Sudanese Armed Forces, the SAF, Sudan's official national military. On the other side, General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, known by his nickname, Hamidi, commander of the Rapid Support Forces, or the RSF. Here's the thing that makes this conflict so uniquely dark. These two men used to be allies. The RSF was created by al-Bashir in 2013, built directly from the bones of the Janjaweed, the same militia that carried out the Darfur genocide. And when al-Bashir fell in 2019, both Burhan and Hamidi joined forces to seize power, staging a coup in 2021. That ended Sudan's transition to democracy and put the military back in charge. But power sharing is only stable until someone wants more power. By 2023, the two generals were locked in a dispute over a critical question: how and when the RSF would be absorbed into the official national army. Hamidi didn't want to give up his independent force, a force that had made him extraordinarily wealthy through gold mining, business empires, and foreign contracts. On April 15th, 2023, the dispute exploded into open war. The fighting started in Khartoum, Sudan's capital city of 6 million people, and spread almost immediately across the country. Within weeks, entire neighborhoods of Khartoum had been reduced to rubble. Hospitals were looted. Civilians were trapped between two armies, fighting in residential streets, markets, and apartment buildings. The RSF moved faster and more aggressively than anyone expected. Within months, they controlled most of Khartoum, most of the western Darfur region, and huge swaths of central Sudan. And as they advanced, the same patterns that defined the Janjaweed to decades earlier re-emerged. Mass killings, sexual violence, villages burned, ethnic communities specifically targeted, particularly Sudan's non-Arab communities, the Fur, the Masalit, the Zagawa. The SAF responded with its own brutality, indiscriminate airstrikes on civilian areas, blockades of humanitarian aid. Neither side in this war has clean hands. But by mid-2024, something important shifted. The SAF began to claw back territory. They retook Omdurman, Khartoum's twin city. And by March 2025, they recaptured Khartoum itself, the capital which had been under RSF control for nearly 2 years. But the RSF strategy had shifted too. Having lost the capital, Hamidi's forces doubled down on the one region where they had near total control, and where the most vulnerable people in Sudan were sheltering Darfur. And at the center of Darfur, the last city still holding out was El Fasher. El Fasher is a city in North Darfur, roughly the size of Baltimore. Before the war, it had a population of around 800,000. By mid-2024, with displaced people pouring in from across Darfur, that number had swollen to an estimated 1.5 million. Most of them refugees from RSF massacres elsewhere in the region. It was the last major city in Darfur still under government control. The RSF surrounded it. For 18 months, they laid siege. Food convoys were blocked. Water infrastructure was attacked. The Zamzam refugee camp nearby, home to hundreds of thousands, was stormed by the RSF in April 2025, killing up to 2,000 people, and forcing 400,000 to flee. In July 2023, researchers at Yale University's Humanitarian Research Lab had already sent a formal warning to the U.S., government, and the United Nations. If Al-Fashir falls to the RSF, a genocidal massacre will occur. The warning was ignored. On October 25, 2025, the last Sudanese armed forces soldiers withdrew from Al-Fashir. The next morning, the RSF entered the city. What followed was documented by over 140 witnesses interviewed by UN investigators, by satellite imagery analyzed by Yale, and by footage that circulated on social media before communications were cut. In the first 3 days, more than 6,000 people were killed. According to UN Human Rights Office findings, at least 1,400 within the city itself, at least 1,600 more on the roads leading out, shot as they tried to flee. At Al-Rashid dormitory inside Al-Fashir University, RSF fighters opened fire on a crowd. Approximately 1,000 people who had gathered there seeking shelter. Around 500 were killed. Witnesses described bodies thrown into the air. RSF fighters moved hospital to hospital. At the Saudi hospital, one of the last functioning medical facilities in the city, fighters were filmed executing patients in their beds. Summary executions took place across the city, with men and boys under 50 specifically targeted, often on the basis of their ethnicity. Adolescents. Young men pulled from homes. Sexual violence was systematic. UN investigators documented rape, gang rape, sexual torture, and abductions for sexual slavery. The RSF constructed an earthen wall, a berm around the city to prevent civilians from escaping while the killing continued. Yale researchers analyzing satellite imagery from above identified 150 separate clusters of objects consistent with human bodies. Some had been burned, others buried in mass graves. In February 2026, the United Nations Independent Fact-Finding Mission published its conclusions. The title of the report, Sudan, Hallmarks of Genocide in Al-Fashir. The total death toll from the Al-Fashir massacre alone, estimates range from 60,000 to over 100,000, with independent verification nearly impossible. Due to the communications blackout, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights called it a wave of intense violence, shocking in its scale and brutality. But Al-Fashir is not the beginning and end of this story. It is the loudest chapter of a catastrophe that has been building for nearly 3 years. Since April 2023, Sudan's civil war has produced the largest displacement crisis in the world. More than 13 million people have been forced from their homes. Nearly a quarter of Sudan's entire population. Over 4 million of those have fled across international borders into Chad, Ethiopia, and South Sudan, countries that are already struggling with their own instability. As of April 2025, 25 million Sudanese people, nearly half the country, were facing acute famine. Doctors Without Borders reported that more than 70% of children under the age of 5 in the worst affected areas were acutely malnourished. Let that land for a moment. 70% of children under 5. Hospitals across the country have been deliberately targeted by both sides. Wojo documented attacks on healthcare facilities throughout 2024 and 2025. Water systems destroyed. Aid convoys blocked or bombed. Humanitarian workers killed. The UN has documented at least 11,300 civilian deaths in 2025 alone, nearly triple the number recorded in 2024. And that is only what could be confirmed. The real number, experts say, is far higher. the former U.S. Envoy for Sudan has estimated that as many as 400,000 people have been killed. Since the war began, Sudan now faces, by virtually every metric, the worst humanitarian crisis on Earth, and yet, coverage of this war in Western media has been a fraction of the attention given to other conflicts. If this conflict feels like it should have ended by now, there is a reason it hasn't. Sudan is not just a local war. It is a proxy battlefield, and the outside powers enabling it are not fringe actors. The UAE has been widely identified as the primary external backer of the RSF. In March 2025, Sudan filed a complaint to the International Court of Justice, directly accusing the UAE of complicity in genocide through its arms supply to Hemedti's forces. The UAE denies this. Why would the UAE back the RSF gold? Sudan has vast gold reserves, and Hemedti's RSF has controlled and exploited those mines. Throughout the war, with the wealth flowing through Gulf financial networks, Egypt and Iran have backed the SAF Sudan's official army. Russia and China have interests in both sides, depending on the strategic moment. Ukraine has also reportedly supplied drones to the SAF. The United States has imposed sanctions on RSF commanders and officially declared that the RSF has committed genocide. Yet progress on stopping the arms flows, particularly from the UAE, a key U.S. ally, has been limited. In late 2025, the U.S., Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE formed a diplomatic grouping called the Quad to push for peace talks. Ceasefires were proposed. The RSF agreed to some. The SAF was skeptical, and with good reason, as every previous ceasefire was broken. In early 2026, with the SAF's government having returned to Khartoum, a showdown is now building in the Kordofan region, the next major battleground. Almost daily drone strikes are hitting civilian markets and hospitals there. The peace is not coming, not yet. Meanwhile, drones, supplied by foreign powers, have transformed the nature of the war, extending the reach and lethality of both sides. Villages hours from the front lines are no longer safe. Humanitarian convoys are targeted from the air. Sudan's war is not just a tragedy. It is an industry, one that outside powers have decided is useful to them. In February 2026, the United Nations formally concluded that the RSF committed genocide in El Fasher. It was the first time a UN-backed body had made that declaration. Against the RSF, it did not stop the war. Fighting has intensified in Kordofan. The UN's own human rights chief warned that the same patterns that produced El Fasher are now appearing there. Blockades, drone strikes on civilians, humanitarian access denied. As the epicenter of the war shifts, he said, "I am extremely worried these crimes may be repeated, because these are patterns." The International Criminal Court has opened investigations. Sanctions have been imposed. Resolutions passed. And yet, 13 million displaced, 400,000 dead, 25 million facing famine, a genocide declared. Scholar Sanmay Moitra argued in late 2025 that the UN had a legal obligation under its own charter to intervene with force, and that by the time the world reached that conclusion, all other options had already been exhausted and ignored. The question hanging over Sudan is not whether the world has the tools to stop this. It is whether the world has decided it wants to. The people of Sudan did not choose this war. They chose democracy and had it taken from them by the generals, who decided power mattered more than the country they were supposed to serve. What is happening in Sudan right now is not complicated. It is not ancient tribal hatred. It is not inevitable. It is a decision made by armed men with foreign backing and foreign weapons to destroy a people. The least the rest of the world can do is look. Share this video. Learn the names LFAS DSAF.HEMEDT. Because the first step to accountability always is refusing to look away.